Welcome to the last episode of the first season of the 40 Portal podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Zach. Last summer, I turned 40 and set out on a process of self-inquiry. A process of self-inquiry not done just alone in my own meditation or journaling or contemplative practice, or even done quietly within the confines of conversations with a few close friends and sisters. Nope. A process of self-inquiry done in community, out loud, on a podcast, interviewing real women in midlife about their own coming of aging stories. And through the collection of handwritten wisdom that you mailed into me, at the heart of that inquiry was these questions. What does it mean to turn 40? What potent passageway is that number? What does it mean for me in my own life? What does it mean for other women? And what can I learn from them? What can we learn from each other? If my culture has been largely scrubbed clean of timeless rituals for marking such rites of passage like turning 40, could I create one? Could I create a ritual in real time, in real life with real women? A kind of call and response, storytelling around the fire, the proverbial fire, an archetypal wisdom exchange through sitting together in honest conversation, a way of bearing witness with and for each other as we move through the decades of our life, as we move through what I have come to know as the 40 portal. And in a world that feels largely consumptive, can we co-create these containers of becoming and unbecoming in community with each other in rich conversation instead of just consuming whatever answers or hacks or fixes or things to buy that the algorithm or influencers or even experts, or let's face it, AI, were trying to serve up for us instead. 40 opens a door that most of us were never shown how to walk through. You don't arrive at 40, I have learned. You enter the portal first. And so this podcast was born in my own 40th year, a listening project into the interior lives of women at the threshold of midlife. What a gift. What a way to spend this past year of being 40 in communion with other women, in conversation that was deep and exploratory and vulnerable and raw and rich. And also, not as a way to offer up any real polished answers, but more of an invitation for my conversation partners, for you, the listener, for those of you who wrote in your questions and your wisdom, for me to allow the process of asking and holding questions and sharing stories to be the whole point, not landing on some perfect outcome or polished answer. And all of this started in the humblest of ways. It started with me bouncing back and forth in private voice memos that I was sending to the real women friends that I was in conversation with, who were also turning 40 right around the time that I was turning 40, and then bringing a blank notebook to my own 40th birthday and asking the women at my party in real life to fill that notebook with their own handwritten wisdom and their big questions. Here is what I wrote on the first page of that notebook the night before I turned 40. Commit to the bit of being yourself. I love collecting the wise words of women and creating connection through the stories we share. Please leave a little blessing in our co-created 40 Portal book. If you have passed the threshold of 40 yourself, tell us what you know, trust, have learned and burned and earned and churned. It could be short and sweet, silly and irreverent, sexy or serious. I am here for all of it. If you are not yet 40, what's an open question you're living? What longing, desire, fear, or dream do you want to put out into the universe? I'll try to do something beautiful with this little book of blessings. What a joy to be in your good company. And I had no idea what this would become. I really didn't. In fact, after my party, I sat with the notebook for a few months. I collected more handwritten submissions that I stapled and taped into the notebook. I just kind of rocked the idea in my little quiet proverbial rocking chair of creativity, waiting to see what it would become. And I almost did nothing with it. But this one page in the notebook, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And what was revealed on that page confirmed something that I had been feeling as I approached 40 myself and then turned 40 and spent the first few months of being 40, that there is a power, a potency to this number that is wild and raw and invigorating and vital and generative and electric, and it's complex. It is nuanced. We contain multitudes, and this power contains multitudes. It contains a tension that generates that power. It's the tension between this feeling that I have lived enough. I have gone through enough cycles of life and learning and becoming and unbecoming, enough turns of the spiral staircase of success and failure and grief and loss and love and wins and all of it, to know that I know some things. I don't know all the things, but I know some things. I have learned some things, and I have some hard-won wisdom to show for it. And that power living alongside of and in generative tension with the idea, the feeling that I am still so young, with possibility, with energy, and God willing that there's still so much more time ahead of me to build and create and make and love and build and burn, all of it. There's still so much ahead of me. This is the page that I'm talking about, by the way. This is the page that made me keep going. So on the first part of the page, one of the women at my party who was also about to turn 40, spoiler alert, it's Becca's episode, Becca Piastrelli. Go listen to that one. She wrote this: 2 days out from 40, I'm curious about this fear I have of becoming irrelevant, disappearing, because I can see in our culture how as a woman ages, she becomes less visible and less valued. But I also have seen women in midlife and elderly years refuse to become invisible, refuse to go quietly. And I'm curious about what it takes to choose that and continue to choose it over and over. How do we, as women, refuse to disappear? So then someone else from the party who was over 40 wrote below it, "Can I chime in on this? Is that okay?" I think in a major way, we disappear from the aggressive societal gaze that has been so often thrust on us. We don't disappear from the spaces we seek out or the community we knit. I feel very seen. by the people I want to be seen by? Am I less visible to random men on the subway or catcallers on the street or condescending men in Home Depot who ask if I know how to use tools? Yes, I am not visible to them anymore. Thank God. The headspace this invisibility gives me, it kicks ass. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Meredith, for that. With almost 2 million millennial women turning 40 every single year right now, I just knew that if more of us could explore questions like these and this generative power of being 40 together, and we could go back and forth and share our experiences and learn from each other and reshape the story in our own words, like Meredith just did for Becca, then perhaps our power wouldn't be erased at 40. It would be magnetized instead. And together, over this season of the 40 Portal podcast, we did just that. You showed up to help me explore this working thesis. The thesis fueled by this textured and nuanced power that a woman in her 40s is perhaps one of the most powerful, generative, and possibly terrifying creatures in the entire universe. Amen, sis. Through these conversations, we rewrote new rules, or perhaps reclaimed timeless ones for what it means to be a woman in her 40s and beyond. We learned together that you are not behind. You are right on time. You're not a late bloomer if you pick up your most vivifying and creative work in midlife, as Kate Schmeeding did with her gorgeous poetry that she didn't even start writing until she was nearly 40. And as she said in episode 1, I'm not a late bloomer. I've been blooming this whole time. We are right on time, and we don't have to rush or worry. We can trust the timing of our lives and finally put down the energy of urgency and rushing. And that's what Tori told us in her episode, that we can soften and stay open and become more curious as we move through the decades of our lives, as Alicia, who is in her 60s, showed us in her episode through her embodied presence and her conversation. Or that Jess Carson showed us as she takes another pivot in her gorgeous career path and pursues her PhD in creativity research in the age of AI in her mid-30s. Same with Amber, going back to school to become a therapist in her mid-30s. We are not one thing, these women show us. We contain multitudes, people. How gorgeous, how alive, how juicy. Speaking of, we learned that we can own our desire and our pleasure. We can name it and claim it. And if that is tantalizing to you, go listen to Becca's episode and then go listen to Emily's episode and enjoy it, babe. We learn that we can grapple and change and become and unbecome as we move through the intersection of our motherhood and our identity and our work in the world, as we heard so tenderly from Clara and Francesca and Gabby and Leah Rubin Cadrain in their episodes. And also that we can laugh from our bellies, that we can cackle and crack up and find levity through the hardship, as I got to feel and be reminded of from my guests like Allison and Leah Znaimer, that we can change and that we can shed stories and reprogram our own default operating modes as we get older. And we don't even have to explain that or justify that or try to prove that we are still nice girls despite our claiming of power. And that's what Kim and I talked about in her episode. that we don't have to people please or care what other people think as long as we're in our own integrity, which is what Nancy and I talked about and Hillary and I talked about, that we can keep learning to love ourselves, that is the real work. And it's the work of a lifetime, and that every single one of us on this journey of learning to love ourselves has a story to tell that is worth telling simply by our virtue of being here. We have worth, we have value, we are enough just as we are. Thank you to Lourdes for all of those reminders and for chopping off my hair live on the podcast in her episode, because it's not a midlife crisis unless you get a major haircut. And speaking of midlife crisis, it's not that it's like the typical thing. We don't need a sports car. We know that, but it is a crisis because the root of that word means to sift, to literally pour over the particles of our life, the pieces that compose our life, and look at each one and ask with striking honesty, does this belong? Does this still belong? Would I choose that right now? These big existential questions that are our birthright, to pause from time to time and sit with and explore and try to live our way into the answer of, which is what Dina's episode did so powerfully. And that we can listen to our own inner wisdom and the wisdom of our ancestors. And that's an act of devotion and an act of revolution. And to do that good work is necessary. Kalia showed us that. Amanda Badier showed us that. Gorgeous. And none of this was theoretical. This was not just a theoretical exploration for me in this thesis writing public project. I have been walking through the portal this whole year. Every conversation I had on the podcast, every letter mailed in, every single one contained some seed of some lesson that I was actually learning myself. You can't think your way through the portal. You can't even listen to a podcast to get you there. The only way through is through. I have had massive growing pains this year, a deep shedding of some of the storylines that I didn't even realize were still playing out. And here I am a year later, having just turned 41, not totally through the portal, but in a place that for now shows me that this body of work is complete. Like, we've done our job here. We can close this particular opening to the portal, and I can go back to doing this work in real time in my own real life in a quieter way. And you can keep listening to the episodes. You can keep finding new ones. You can keep exploring old ones. You can keep sharing them with the women in your life who you are in real conversation with. And you can even continue to mail me your letters, your own wisdom, learned and earned and burned and churned, or the questions that you're living your way into the answer of. The conversation can continue. Use the podcast. Sift through it. Keep what works, toss out what doesn't. Share it with the women in your life who you're actually having these conversations with. Remember, there is no monolith of a woman in her 40s either. And that these stories here are just information and knowledge. They're examples of others' hard-won wisdom and freedom and becoming. And we can't borrow that from each other. I learned that this year too. We have to do the work ourselves. We can learn and we can be buoyed by each other and by each other's stories, emboldened by each other's stories. And that's what we did this past year. So thank you so much to all of my guests, to those of you who wrote into my notebook or mailed me your letters, to those of you who listened. This has been one of the most important conversations I've had in my life here on the podcast. It's also been one of the most magically creative years of my life. And it's also been one of the most potently transformative years of my life. And it's what I said on that first page of the notebook. Commit to the bit of being yourself, and you too might be amazed by what unfolds for you when you do. Okay, I'll see you again another time. Thank you so much for simply being here. This is Catherine Zach signing off from the 40 Portal.